big stories. The DENR issues a cease and desist order against Captain's Peak, along with studying a range of violations that the controversial resort within the Chocolate Hills may have breached. There's potentially criminal liability too.
The Czech Republic pledges its full support for the Philippines' right to freely navigate the West Philippine Sea after a bilateral meeting between President Marcos and Czech President Petr Pavel. The two also discussed cybersecurity, defense, and protection for OFWs.
Speaking of defense cooperation, we will be speaking with Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, Hae Kyong Yu, about the strategic partnership between Canberra and Manila and what Australian investors were interested in here.
Welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen.
And I'm Shawn.
The Environment Department has issued a cease and desist order against Captain's Peak Resort. Yes, that controversial resort within the Chocolate Hills protected area. DENR's Undersecretary for Field Operations, Juan Miguel Cuna, said the CDO was issued yesterday, putting the resort under close monitoring of the agency to make sure it won't open for business. The agency's CDO came 6 months after it issued a temporary closure order on September 6, 2023, and nearly 3 months after it issued a notice of violation on January 22 against the resort.
But the resort's problems are just beginning. The DENR said that aside from operating without an Environmental Compliance Certificate, or ECC, they are looking into other possible violations Captain's Peak may have committed. These include discharging water without a permit, building a deep well without permission from the National Water Resources Board, and other similar infractions. They may even face criminal charges.
And then under the INAIPAS law po, yun ang mabigat kasi there are penalties for violation, for criminal liability. May mga penalty po siya, and it's not small. Minimum of 1 million to 5 million pesos maximum for a criminal liability. At meron po karagdagang minimum of 6 years to a maximum of 12 years imprisonment for putting up structures without the appropriate permits within the protected area.
Is there a chance, though, that the Chocolate Hills Resort may still open? DENR Secretary Tony Yulo Loizaga says they're studying it, but UNESCO's designation of the Chocolate Hills as an important geological site will come into play.
Right now, we are not actually able to determine whether we can have them open again. We are reviewing the range of violations, because apart from not having an ECC, there are other possible violations. The geopark, as I mentioned earlier, designation by UNESCO is very strict. If we find, in fact, that our own criteria, is already very, very stringent, this is probably even more stringent as far as we are concerned in terms of the protection of that environment. So right now, it is unclear whether or not they will be able to open again.
So how did the Bohol local government react to this latest development? Let's find out from News 5's John Aroa. What do you have for us, John?
Shawn, the local government of Sagbayan is now also under investigation of the Bohol provincial government. This comes after the LGU granted a business permit to the resort even though it lacked an environmental compliance certificate. However, they emphasized that the DENR also bears responsibility for the negligence.
We will ask the legal team kung ano ang dapat gawin dito. We will correct what is anong cause of this mess. I was so embarrassed na nag-operate pala sila na walang ECC. So mayroong negligence yung DENR dito, napabayaan. The damage that has been done.
The Bohol provincial government, meanwhile, asserts that they did not fall short in this matter. They claim that they previously requested the DENR to refine the guidelines regarding construction in protected areas like the Chocolate Hills. However, they allege that the agency did not respond to the request.
In terms of enforcement talaga, hindi sa amin. So it's the role of the DENR to enforce. Ang sa amin lang is to complement.
This issue became even more complicated as a significant portion of the land is actually privately owned even before the declaration of the Chocolate Hills as a protected area. This is also the reason why the demolition of Captain's Peak Garden and Resort cannot be done immediately.
Pagdating po sa demolition, kailangan pag-aralan. Kasi hindi po illegal occupation to, private property po ito at pagmemay-ari nila yung structures na nilagay nila.
As of now, 2 more resorts within the protected area of the Chocolate Hills are also on the watch list. One is the Bud Agta in the town of Carmen, which stands prominently along the hillside. The other is Sagbayan Peak, which had a cemented road built leading up to the hill. Shawn, with all of these developments, the Bohol local government is set to establish a review and development committee dedicated to overseeing future resort constructions in the area. The province also plans to enact clear ordinances to ensure the preservation of the Chocolate Hills. Shawn?
Thank you so much for that update. News 5's John Aroa.
Well, in other news, the Czech Republic has expressed its full support for the Philippines' right to freely navigate the West Philippine Sea.
Marine transport, because that's
We fully support the Philippines when it comes to their entitlement to free movement, and also support, because that's a principle. Not only we all respect, but also secure global and region stability. To us, the South China Sea may seem to be far, far away. But if you take into account the percentage of shares of world or global trade that passes through this area, any disruption of these routes would have an adverse impact on Europe, not only in the form of a shortage of goods, but also soaring prices, which is why we have to pay attention to this topic.
Czech President Peter Pavel announced it during a joint press conference with President Marcos just after they held a bilateral meeting. Marcos is also seeking assistance from the Czechs for the modernization of the AFP.
As we pointed out and continue to discuss, the Armed Forces of the Philippines is undergoing a modernization program. And under that modernization program, there will be a great deal of procurement that needs to be done to modernize our forces and to modernize our capabilities. And the Czech Republic has always been an important part of that development, of that evolution.
Pavel says they are open to offering defense assets to the Philippines, particularly aviation and land equipment. Pavel also says they're also ready to explore talks on cybersecurity and other issues in the South China Sea. Another area that Marcos highlighted in their meeting was tourism, where he mentioned the Philippines' regional airports are being upgraded, and he invited more Czechs to come and visit.
Apart from talking about maritime security and tourism, Marcos and Pavel also signed other agreements. For the details, let me bring in Maricel Halili reporting to us from Prague. Maricel, what do you have for us?
Reg, as you mentioned earlier, the defense cooperation between the Philippines and Czech Republic will also focus on cybersecurity. Marcos and Pavel also signed a labor agreement in the form of a joint communique that seeks to provide protection to Filipino workers. This on the back of Czech Republic doubling its quota for Filipino workers entering their country starting on May. The number of OFWs that can enter Czech Republic has climbed to over 10,000 from the previous 5,500. Next week, officials of the Agriculture Ministry of Czech Republic will be visiting the Philippines together with some businessmen from their country. This visit will allow them to check on potential investments in the Philippines and to see our country's initiative in terms of food security. Reg, President Marcos will be meeting the Filipino community here in Prague before flying back to Manila. Reg?
Thanks for that update, Maricel Halili from Prague. Well, to say that we need help on cybersecurity may be understating it. The House website reportedly saw an overwhelming 541.66 million cyber attacks in a single day. That was on Wednesday, March 13th. House Secretary General Regina said their tech team reported an unusual surge in internet traffic on the lower chamber's website. And the attack was identified as distributed denial of service, or a DDoS attack, which aims to overwhelm target websites and render them inaccessible. According to the House's IT department, the attackers originated from Indonesia, United States, Colombia, India, the Russian Federation, Tunisia, Thailand, and Greece. However, they also said that this may not be entirely accurate, especially if the attackers are using a VPN. Nonetheless, the House says no data was breached.
If you notice po kasi, yung attack sa atin, nami-mitigate natin. Kaya lang imagine niyo 500 million sabay-sabay nag-a-access sa may account yun. Yung safety ng data natin, ng internet natin, we can assure you na we are doing our best to safeguard it. Kung mapapansin nyo, DDoS attack yung ginagawa sa atin, meaning offensive. They are just sending us request kasi wala sila nakukuha pabalik. So wala pong breach na nangyayari dito.
Along with this, the House is now looking for a third-party company to assist them on cybersecurity. Currently, their IT department has been monitoring the website and says there have been no reported attacks since Wednesday. The incident has also been reported to the DICT, with Velasco calling on the agency to assist in the investigation.
We call on the DICT to investigate these DDoS attacks and ascertain where they are really coming from. If they are local or foreign hackers or a collaboration of both, we must know the reason for these attacks. Is it for money or for political reasons, as they may have been contracted to destabilize our institution for whatever purpose.
Well, up next, the Marcos administration continues to strengthen its ties with other nations amid rising tensions in the West Philippine Sea. And among those countries is Australia. We'll be speaking with Australian ambassador to the Philippines, Hae Kyong Yu, about the stronger coordination between the Philippines and Australia when the big story returns. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Story here on One News.
The Philippine Army conducted its first large-scale combined arms training exercise, or CATEX, also nicknamed Katihan, over at the Camp O'Donnell in Capas, Tarlac. The exercise is meant to test the Army's capabilities during combat or in the event of an invasion. Let's get more details on what happened from Brian Castillo. Brian, what were the drills like?
Shawn, we got to see a different side of the Philippine Army in their combined arms training, or the Katihan exercises in Capas, Tarlac today. This is the first large-scale simulation involving formations across the country to improve territorial defense against external forces. Around 5,000 soldiers were expected to participate in these drills.
Not necessarily show of force. Kailangan na nating paghandaan ang ating abilidad as a country, as a nation, as an armed forces, as the Philippine Army, doon sa mas importante at mas mahalagang capability, which is to fight wars, to fight battles, doon sa tinatawag nating territorial defense mode.
To give you a picture of what the exercises are like, you can see on your personnel firing these autonomous truck-mounted howitzer system, or the Atmos 155mm self-propelled guns. This is part of simulations wherein the Philippines is being invaded. These Atmos units are critical to the Army's artillery, since it can hit targets at a distance, even those beyond 40 kilometers.
In wartime, when you conduct offensive and defensive positions, you use artillery fires to destroy the enemy. And also yung mga air defense assets nila to minimize yung casualties pag nag-conduct ng defensive position.
The Philippine Army is also focused on training its personnel for mass deployment in critical locations, which is a big shift from internal defense missions of the past. There's also a need to train soldiers to troubleshoot in the middle of live-fire exercises, especially in cases where the Atmos units are jammed. Such was the case in one of the drills today, which caused some delays. Shawn, the Philippine Army made it clear that the Katihan exercises are part of efforts to improve the country's territorial defense. They emphasized that the drills are not directed towards any country. Shawn?
Thanks for that. News 5's Brian Castillo.
The Department of Foreign Affairs has confirmed that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be in Manila next week from March 18 to 19. According to the Department of State, during his time here, Blinken will reiterate the U.S. government's ironclad commitment to its alliance with the Philippines. He will meet with President Marcos and Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo. The officials will tackle a range of bilateral and global issues, including on regional peace and stability, human rights and democracy, economic prosperity, health, clean energy, semiconductors, and the digital economy. There's also a chance Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa may join, turning it into a trilateral meeting on defense. In Prague, Marcos was asked about what the aim of the defense talks is.
And with an eye not to winning any kind of conflict, but really just to maintain the peace and to continue to defend the sovereignty and the sovereign rights of the Philippines when it comes to these international differences that we are having to deal with right now.
Well, one other country that President Marcos has been busy shoring up defense and economic ties with is Australia. You may recall we reported last week on his back-to-back trips to Australia, first to Canberra for a state visit with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, then to Melbourne for the ASEAN-Australia Summit. To talk about these two trips, we are very honored to have with us tonight Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, Ambassador PH Hae Kyong Yu. Thanks for braving Friday traffic to be with us in the studio.
Is that right? Thank you, ladies, and happy National Women's Month.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so it's great to be here with three amazing women.
Right. And it's also great to be speaking to you at a time when we're seeing so many more of the ambassadors being women.
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely.
Right.
I think we're up to about 13 or 14 at the moment.
That's right.
And we have a great network where we support each other, and it's great to have other women ambassadors representing our countries and, you know, doing what's best for the Philippines here. So it's great.
So good to hear. All right, we promised to talk about the trips, and it was a jam-packed week and a half for you guys and
For
also
sure.
the president.
For sure.
But the first thing I want to ask you about is President Marcos addressing a joint sitting of Parliament. We have the pictures for that. We could just roll it. What's the significance behind that? Do foreign dignitaries often get invited to address a joint sitting of Parliament in Australia?
Not at all, not at all. Look, I'm still buzzing from what was fantastic visits by the President and the First Lady. As you said, Reg, addressing joint Parliament in Australia is the highest honour that we can actually provide to any foreign leader. And this is the first time a Philippine President addressed our joint Parliament. And it's not a common thing. We have only offered it to really very small number of foreign leaders around the world. So it has great significance. And of course, I was there for the whole visit, 2 visits, in fact. And the energy, the positive energy in the air, the way the President interacted with all our politicians, not just the Prime Minister and senior ministers, but all members of Parliament and the senators, was really a sight to be seen. He was provided with so much respect, and one could say we really rolled out the red carpet for the President and the First Lady.
Well, he had a lot of things to say in his address, and one of the things that made a lot of headlines around the world was him saying that the Philippines was on the front line of this regional peace and stability issue. How do you think that message landed with Parliament?
Very well. This is something that Australia has always been very, very aware of. And this really is at the heart of why our 2 countries elevated our relationship to a strategic partnership only last year, September last year. And I think that there's absolutely wide recognition that the South China Sea is an important international waterway for all of us, particularly Australia, where our region is this region. We share a region together. And so President Marcos's message about how the Philippines is absolutely in the front line resonated really well with our whole Parliament. It actually allowed us to reconfirm our absolute rock-solid commitment to being a very, very useful and one that's based on trust, strategic partner to the Philippines.
Is the honor given to President Marcos reflective of the stance of Australia in terms of defense and maritime security? Where does Australia exactly stand with issues with the rising tensions in the West Philippine Sea?
Our position has always been consistent on this very, very important issue, which is that all countries should adhere to UNCLOS, UN Convention on Law of the Sea, that every country has the right to exercise freedom of navigation and overflight, and that we need to build a region that is stable, peaceful, and prosperous, that is based on rules-based order, that respects sovereignty. And this is why our position aligns completely with the Philippines. And as the only one of 2 countries that actually has visiting forces agreement with the Philippines, our defense cooperation with the Philippines goes back decades, and that will continue. And I'm sure that you are all aware that every time there is tension in the West Philippine Sea, we are out there vocally expressing our concerns. And this is happening from the highest level in Australia, right down to me as an ambassador in the Philippines, expressing my support. And actually showing that it is actually in everyone's interest, every country's interest, to ensure that we protect the rules-based order that has served us so well for many decades.
Right. That leads me to ask, Ambassador, in terms of China being a concern in the region and in the South China Sea, how does Australia perceive China in terms of, is it being perceived as a threat or more of a nuisance at this point?
Well, we have a very important relationship with China, just as the Philippines does with China. In fact, China is our #1 trade partner, as it is to you
Ours,
as well.
yes.
And of course, China is a growing power and it has a very important role to play in the region and in the world for that matter. So in that environment, our government has made it very clear that it is important for Australia to have a relationship that is stable with China, where as two mature countries, we agree where we can and cooperate, but we disagree where we must, and we always act in national interest. And this is the line that President Marcos have always used in terms of the Philippines' position with China as well, that it is actually about the Philippines' national interest. And to pursue that, you have to act accordingly.
Actually, when you were in Melbourne, there was an incident. When the president was in Melbourne, and so were you guys. There was a
Yes.
collision.
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
over at the West Philippine Sea. We were covering it extensively. There was also a water cannoning incident, and you tweeted about it.
Absolutely. Yes.
We have that tweet. If I could just pull that up. You said, discussing peace and stability at the ASEAN 50 Australia Summit. Australia shares the Philippines' concerns about dangerous actions by China's vessels at Second Thomas Shoal today. We call for restraint and respect for international law, particularly UNCLOS. Give us a better sense of what talks were like on the ground about what China was doing on that day and how
Right.
difficult it was. This was during the ASEAN-Australia Summit, and
Absolutely.
you don't have consensus yet at
That's
the moment.
right.
So what were
Yes.
the talks like?
Well, there were many tracks to the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit. And one of those tracks was actually on maritime cooperation. And just the day before this happened, we had a very good conference on maritime security where this won't surprise you. Foreign Secretary Manalo and our Foreign Minister Penny Wong were two keynote speakers. Expressing exactly the things that I mentioned in my tweet and reinforcing the importance of protecting the rules-based order and particularly UNCLOS. So these were the conversations that were being held in Melbourne just as that incident was about to happen. And so, of course, the very next day when that incident happened, the conversation continued. And we had the Leaders' Summit where the discussion very much featured around the need to create a region that we all want to live in, the one that is peaceful, stable, and prosperous. And I think, our actions, code of conduct in the maritime domain is a very important component of creating that region that we all aspire to.
Ambassador, we've had the VFA for decades now, as you mentioned, and the President Marcos and Prime Minister Albanese signed an MOU stating an enhanced maritime cooperation between the Philippines and Australia.
That's correct.
Apart from, we had the joint patrol back in, I think, November
That's correct.
last year.
Yes.
What can we expect concretely in our seas in the coming year?
I think you can absolutely expect more activities, whether it's bilateral or even minilateral, that actually continues to show how important it is to achieve freedom of navigation and of overflight in these international waters. But in addition to that, Australia is already doing so much in the maritime space with the Philippines. The Enhanced Maritime Cooperation MOU that you mentioned, it absolutely talks about how we need to further strengthen our maritime security cooperation. But what's really exciting is that it also talks about other types of cooperation in the maritime domain. For example, environmental protection. These things are just as important when we think about the rules-based order. It's not always about defense and security, but also protection of our environment. So to give you some very practical examples of what we are doing, Australian government is actually working with the Philippine government to help you measure plastic pollutions in waters. And it's a very practical methodology that the best of minds in this space from Australia has brought to the Philippines, and training not only government officials but NGOs, LGUs of course, but also academia, so that people, critical mass within the Philippines, have the know-how on how to build the baseline of plastic pollutions and then determine policies that will allow you to measure your progress. That's one example. Another example is actually around coral reef restoration. One of my favorite projects we're doing here, I call it IVF for corals. And this is a method by which they actually, literally, capture when they naturally spawn and artificially inseminate for better growth of corals. And the results that we've achieved in this is phenomenal. And these things are happening around the Palawan Island and so forth. So these are some practical things we're doing in the maritime.
Are we going to see more
protection as well.
marine scientists for one?
Absolutely.
Over in the West Philippine Sea, give us some
Researchers,
data
perhaps?
on destruction that's being caused.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to help with that, we also have our Australian Institute for Marine Science that has been helping the Philippine scientists do, if you like, just the mapping of the coral reefs, undersea Google map, if you like. Now, that is a really time-consuming thing for divers to go under, take photographs, bring it up and upload. The system we have now introduced to the Philippines allow all of that to be done automatically with speedboat with the camera, and the imagery gets uploaded to iCloud, processed by AI assistants to produce products that will help you to understand what's happening like that. So these are some of the examples of how Australia is working with the Philippines to look at the whole maritime domain, right? And to ensure that we embed in it this approach to the rules-based order and this cooperative way to protect our environment as well as our sovereignty.
But also, I think one question on top of to carry on from what Gretchen was asking was one question that's been raised is that whether Australia will commit to regular joint patrols with the Philippine Army and Navy. Right?
Well,
so we've done one? Or
yes, we've done one, but
yeah.
of course that's actually building on a number of exercises we do through our Enhanced Defence Cooperation program. So that's just one component of it, but another exciting thing we did last year was the biggest amphibious exercise Australia has ever carried out overseas, and that was with the Philippines. It was Exercise Alon, and that exercise involved 2,000 Australian military personnel, over 700 Philippine personnel, with assistance from US Marine Corps for the transport, and it was observed by the President and our Deputy Prime Minister, who actually came all the way to Zambales to observe that, and that was his second visit in 1 year to the Philippines.
I remember the photos.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Yes, I remember
we covered it too.
Yeah. But
so that's an example of all those different activities that are ongoing. So of course there will be continuation of
on
that.
the policy side, Ambassador, and taking a step back, of course you would know that ASEAN has been struggling to come up with a code of conduct in the South China Sea. With the recent, so to speak, enhancement of Australian and ASEAN relations, how game is Australia to help the ASEAN try to come up with this code of conduct that has been maybe a decade or more overdue?
Look, the code of conduct between ASEAN and China are for them to sort out. And so obviously, as we're not a member of ASEAN, we will have to defer to ASEAN members to pursue that negotiation. But what we ask is that whatever is the result, we hope that the code of conduct that is agreed to or that is being negotiated will think of third parties' rights as well. We cannot afford for that code of conduct to in any way impede on countries' rights under the international law. It should be absolutely consistent with UNCLOS. And I've heard the President say this as well, that UNCLOS provides the perfect framework within which that code of conduct negotiation should be carried out.
All right. Well, you were speaking about all these examples where Australia is assisting us in the maritime space, but of course, the trip to Australia was also a lot about investments and business and maybe government to government brain exchanges and what have you. Of course, you've been here and you've been, of course, living with the high inflation that we all have to suffer with, high rice prices, etc. Our flagging agricultural sector. Would Australia have any, suggestions or any help in that regard as well?
First of all, Shawn, can I just say I'm an economist by trade, and the high inflation you talk about, that's something that's being experienced by everyone around the world. And given the circumstances, I actually think the Philippines has done remarkably well in actually managing the headwinds that are frankly not created by you. These are global external factors. But secondly, you're absolutely right. The visit was much to do about business, especially trade and investment between Australia and ASEAN countries. And of course, given my role, my focus was very much on the Philippines. And this was actually built on perfect platform of Australian government's Southeast Asia economic strategy to 2040, which was announced in September last year. In fact, this was announced when the Prime Minister came to visit Manila. And this very, very practical strategy sets out a roadmap to how Australian government is going to help to improve trade and investment between ASEAN and Australia. And it was so exciting because during the summit, the special summit, the Australian government announced packages of things that's going to help in this regard of $500 million, okay, worth $500 million. Plus, it actually announced a $2 billion Southeast Asia investment facility. Now, this is massive news. What that means is that Australian government is actually putting their money where their mouth is. They say, Australian business, we want you to invest into Southeast Asia. We will find great bankable projects for you. And when you decide to invest and you need some encouragement, $2 billion, Australian government is willing to go in with whether it's seed funding, guarantees, or loans. So this is what the facility will allow us to do. So it was a very, very significant announcement. On top of that, the government has decided to set up what we are calling it now deal teams across the Southeast Asian region. And the Philippines will also be benefiting from it. I'm proud to say my empire is growing and the embassy will get 2 additional resources at least, where these people, these experts, will be responsible for monitoring your investment environment, opportunities that are coming up, and then packaging them up to matchmake to perfect Australian companies that should take up that opportunity.
Just very curious.
Yes.
How does Australia find economic restrictions and
I was gonna
with
ask
regard
that
to setting up shop here in the Philippines?
You can ask the broader context, which is like, I'm sure you know,
With the
Congress
charter
is
change.
debating charter change at the moment.
Yes. Cha-cha, right? You call it cha-cha. Look, without wanting to put myself in the middle of a very, very political debate that is happening in the Philippines right now, what I can say is that the Philippines has made a huge headway in opening up its economy. I really like what I see in terms of the direction the government is taking here. And this is why I'm actively promoting the Philippines to Australian businesses back home. I'm saying, don't miss out, guys. Don't make your decisions based on outdated information about the Philippines. Things are changing, so pay attention.
What are the things that you tell these investors to convince them to invest or put their money here in the Philippines, apart from, of course, the grants from the government? Because there are other Australian ambassadors to ASEAN that you're in competition with. So I'm sure you're all pitting to like promoting your country. No,
Yeah,
put the
sure.
money here, right? So
But
what do you tell the investors?
I've got killer facts, and so I win every time, in my view, anyway.
And you've got the suit too.
That's right, I've got
Power
the power
The power
suit,
suit.
you know, and I told you the economics background comes in very handy. Well, some of the killer facts about why the Philippines is so attractive. Number one, you are a growing young population where human capital is one of your biggest assets. And two, you actually, as English speaking, I mean, English is one of your official language as well. And that goes a long way when you're talking about international business. And three, we all know about all this untapped potential when it comes to whether it's mining and huge economic growth potential. So when you actually put all of that in place, this is a country that is one of the fastest growing countries in the world at the moment, right? This was certainly, I think, the highest growth rate within Asia. And this is a country where, because of that economic growth projection, you are going to need a lot more of everything, whether it's energy, good quality food, good education, good infrastructure, right? There's going to be huge demand for all of that in the Philippines. So you combine all those factors together with government that is absolutely determined for sound economic reform, who is absolutely committed to cutting red tape. I mean, you just have to look at the creation of ATA, right? Anti-Red Tape Agency, and how they are operating to really cut through some of the red tape that foreign investors experience. You just have to look at the creation of Green Investment Lane and how they're actually rolling out this one-stop shop for foreign investors, of which, can I just say, the first project to be approved through that was an Australian company. Macquarie. Macquarie Group got the first approval for their project. They have two. One, it's a telecommunication towers, and another floating solar on Laguna Lakes. So these are examples of how the government is really making a difference. And that's why it is so easy for me to sell the Philippines to Australian businesses.
But when President Marcos was in Australia recently, he had to speak to business leaders. What were the conversations like afterwards? What were they looking to? Where were they looking to go in terms of industries?
Yes, Australian businesses, the Southeast Asian Economic Strategy actually highlight the sectors that we really want to focus on. Australian businesses are very interested in green energy space here. We have a lot of land, a lot of renewable energy technology, and we really feel that we can value add to the Philippines. Australian businesses are very interested in food sector as well. You talked about agricultural sector previously, Shawn, and I think there are two aspects to that. Frankly, we produce a lot more than we need, and they are good quality produce at very affordable prices. So we think there is a huge potential to even further increase our market share in the Philippines, especially as your middle income group rises. The second thing is actually around agricultural productivity, technology, and know-how. We have done large-scale farming, all our lives in Australia. We think that there are some learnings that can be adopted. And so to that end, we are already doing some fantastic project with the Philippines that is science-based. And we have our organization called ASEA, which is basically Agricultural Research Center, which is doing things like soil health project with the Philippines. In fact, the President and I went to see one of those soil health laboratories being built, and he was briefed. I mean, this is the best story. He was briefed by a Filipino-Australian soil scientist who came from Agusan del Sur. He was one of the indigenous community members, very poor family. but worked really hard, got the provincial government's scholarship to go to uni, then got Australian government scholarship to go to Australia to study soil science at master's level, became an Australian at PhD level, and now he's helping the Philippines with that, briefing the president.
Oh, wow. Wow. Ambassador, I can't help but I think I need to ask a question. The president's visit to Australia was also marred by protest, with Senator Rice, for example, talking about the Australian government giving a platform to the president and legitimizing his government despite, the human rights abuses by his predecessor. Yet, the Australian government also pledged, I think, 20 million in reform to our justice system. Where exactly does Australia stand on that issue?
Australia works with the Philippines so that Philippine government and the Filipino people can ensure that there are appropriate human rights measures in place. You talk about Senator Rice. That was personally, I thought a bit unfortunate because it's in the chamber, but as a senator, it's democratic country, felt she wanted to, it's Australia, she wanted to express her views. Of course, when she was asked to leave, she left without causing any fuss. After kind of showing her card, any fuss left. But I think that actually shows, just like in the Philippines, the attributes of living in a democratic society. So when you put that into perspective, I really don't think we can even call it a protest. It was so small. And in the whole scheme of things, there was a lot more positive reinforcement of the importance of our bilateral relationship from Australia to the Philippines. And so I really think it was a huge success on all fronts. And you talk about the justice program that our Prime Minister announced during the guest of government visit of $40 million. This is all about building the Philippines' capacity, which is driven by the Philippines.
What kind of reforms
So
does
this is
Australia hope to see?
so this is actually working with the judiciary to ensure that their system is designed in such a way that the vulnerable group can access it more easily. So taking into account the victims of like women, children, and really vulnerable groups, and are the justice system, are processes designed in such a way that it is non-threatening to them and easy for them to access. So that's one element of it. Another element we're looking at is also even the jail system to ensure that the way it's designed does not allow for radicalization within, but proper rehabilitation. So these are the things that the Philippine government have told us they can really do with some help from Australia, that we have very willingly partnered with the Philippines to design them.
That's actually a very interesting conversation, but we have to pause for a gap, so we will come back to you just after a very short gap. That was Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, HKU. Stay with us, there's more to come after this. Welcome back. You are still watching the big story here on One News, and we are still here with Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, HKU. It was such a scintillating conversation. We couldn't let you go. But I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned, which is the $500 million fund to Southeast Asia that was announced recently. Part of that, I know, is for maritime security, $64 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
But
Well,
that's
very
to
good.
the whole region.
That's right.
And what I want to know is, what does the Philippines need to do to get a hold of some of that money for military support?
I'm working very hard to make sure we get as much of that into the
How can we help?
Philippines as possible. So don't you worry about that. We're already on the case. You're absolutely right. 64 million is for the whole region. But the Philippines is already getting a really good share of that. And some of that work is things like law of the sea training that we're providing to the Philippines. Did you know we've already trained more than 430 staff within the government, and they find it so useful because what we do is we bring the experts on law of the sea and they do case studies. And they say, how would you apply this in a situation like this? And we have both the basic course as well as master's course now, because we have staff from PCG, from Justice Department, from other areas like that, who are really engaged in these issues on a day-to-day basis here.
The
Literally.
trainings are done here in the Philippines?
Yeah, done here. And then what we do as part of that is actually do a study tour back to Australia. So we can actually show some of these practitioners how Australia applies their law of the sea to our situation and what facilities and infrastructure we have around those issues. So it's a very active course that we carry out. We're on to a number of years now, and as I said, already 430 trained, and we want to continue with that. So that's just one tiny example. We also do capacity building for PCG and other things like that, and we look at whether we can train them around even sustainment of vessels so that you can actually have assets that are longer lasting.
We need that.
It's a lot of practical courses.
She's working on it. She's
working on it. And we actually recently
put the
even
pressure on you.
gifted some drones to PCG.
We also reported about
As,
that.
as well as, did you report this one as well? Water purifier. So this is actually a machine to purify water while out in the ocean. So they've actually got drinking water and is able to actually facilitate
It's
longer.
like a mini desalination machine?
Desalination type thing.
All right.
That's right. Yeah.
It's amazing that we're, getting a lot of practical help and assistance. From
Australia is all about practicality.
The director is signaling for me to wrap up, but I will be. I think we'd be remiss to not ask you very, very quickly. Was there any talk about easing visa restrictions?
Oh, I nearly
Philippines
forgot.
to Australia?
Reg, thank you so much for
Just
asking
very
me that
quickly.
question.
Canada has
really
already
forgot.
sort of done
So
it.
yes, one of the announcements was on business visas. So starting this year, mid this year, business visas that are issued to the Filipinos, it will be extended from 3 years to 5 years. So it will be multiple entry, 5 years. Another visa announcement we made, and the details are still to be worked through, but my expectation that it will apply to the Philippines is frequent flyer sort of visas, frequent traveler visas of 10 years.
Okay.
10 years time frame. And with the right requirements, the recipient will be able to just have this one visa, which will allow you to go back and forth to Australia for 10 years.
Tourist visa?
What about
Tourist visa.
Wow, 10 years.
10 years, not bad, huh?
So
Frequent
you're working
flyer.
on that for us, right?
Yes, frequent
Filipinos
travelers.
have the 4th largest diaspora community in Australia.
400,000 of you. And, that was another reason why the visit was so warm and so successful. everywhere the president went, he and the First Lady came across Filipino Australians that are doing amazing things. And even our politicians were like, 25% of my electorate are Filipino Australians, and I love them. And some of our politicians were speaking to them in Tagalog. It was amazing.
That's amazing.
So, that's really the foundation of our relationship, the strong people-to-people links. And Australia has so much to thank Filipino Australians for the vibrancy of our multiculturalism.
Fantastic. Great to hear about all of these initiatives. We're going to have to leave it there. We've run clear out of time. But thank you so much for joining us tonight as Shawn, Ambassador to the Philippines.
We wish you
HKU.
good luck in lobbying for the Philippines.
Lobbying
We're
for
counting
everything.
on you. We're
Absolutely.
counting on you.
Girl
Mabuhay. Don't worry.
visas, etc.
military
Thank you.
support, visas, everything. It's all on the women, right?
Beef.
Australian beef too.
On that note, that's it for the big story on this Friday night.
Please include the wine. Here One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night and a great weekend.